Okay, well, welcome to the 2017 COGPS conference. Thank you all for being here. Before I go into this, I just want to say it's been so amazing to see this organization grow. And we were here 2 years ago, and I think we had like 60 people. Now we're up to 130. So thanks to all of you. And I want to especially thank our first-time attendees. Thanks for taking the chance on us. Right? So thank you guys for showing up and supporting this vision. Something's happening here, and all of you are a part of it. The group culture in Colorado is blowing up. It's exploding. So thank you for taking your weekend and taking your time to spend it with us and learn about group and learn about yourself. So I want to talk about where COGPS is and what we've been doing and what our future looks like. So this is our membership, okay? For the past year, we've got over 100 new members. We're at a 42% increase in membership. So again, this is you guys. I was already I don't remember like 3 times. But yeah, thank you guys, right? Thank you for doing this, right? Thank you for joining in and learning about us and wanting to develop and grow as a group leader. Not only that, we're also rich. So we are making way more money this year. And a lot of this goes toward providing trainings like this, giving scholarships to students, and helping to enrich. We're a nonprofit, so all the money actually trickles down back to you guys and helps to send people to AGPA and to COGPS parents. So this is paying it forward. And we're going to go in later in this presentation and see what your money is going to be spending on, and there's some really good stuff coming up in the future. But thank you for your donations, thank you for your contributions, and your belief in what we're doing. We are also just getting bigger. So we're up to 130 attendees. Our sponsorships are growing. We had 3 last year. We got 6 this year. We've added 1 more institute group and 2 new workshops to our conference. Right? Our board is now up to 12 members, and we have an active apprenticeship program. What do I think so? An active apprenticeship program and 20 apprentices. So we are going through the roof. So what's next, right? What's next for Colorado Group Psychotherapy Society? Well, we're now the 4 Corners Group Psychotherapy Society. So as of summer of this year, we've expanded our borders, and we now represent 4 states. We represent Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico. So over the next year, we're going to be reaching out to these states and bringing in people from different diverse backgrounds, different diverse schools of thought, and creating a better conversation, right? We want to really be the voice of group in this area. These other states don't have affiliates right now, and it's up to us to get out there and to outreach and to help them learn, right? And they have lots to teach us too. So in 2018, we got a lot of great stuff coming up for you. We have Mary and Sally. Where's Mary? So before I go into how great Marion is, she made this conference. Okay, come up here. Come up here. This is a little panel. This is my conference wife. She made this happen, right? This thing has been a lot of moving parts, and it would not happen without Mary. All right, bye. But she is our event coordinator, and we are running training groups next year. So some of you may have come to our training groups this year with Bob Unger and Angela Siliberti. We're aiming to offer monthly training groups.
You can talk about me some more.
Mary's great. They don't know how great Marion is. She really she makes shit happen. Anyway, so we're going to be running these training groups, and we're sourcing our local leaders to help each of you become better group leaders. So we got Dr. Elizabeth Olson, we have Dr. Ryan Kennedy, Dr. Jason Seidel, Yoon Kane, Sarah Lynn Maslink, and Ben White are part of our lineup in the beginning. If any of you are interested in running a training group and we want to hear from you, contact Marion. Right? We want to get you involved and get you sharing what you know and what you're passionate about with our members.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Also coming up with one of our senior members, Jay Logan, she'll be running a year of conversations. This is a little bit different. So the training groups are more experiential, more process-based. The year of conversation is going to be more didactic, more conversational. She's going to be running for a year, and these will be hosted online. So for those of you that can't make the drive out to a training group, or for people in the other states, this is a great place to get involved. And they're going to be recorded, so even if you miss them, you can go on our website as a member and see them. Pretty cool, right? Then we got our darling. Where's Angelo? There he is. Angelo Filiberti is going to be running a workshop. It's going to be March 17th with Jordan Price. And they're running it on entering the earlier known, sensing when to speak and when to be silent in groups. You always get the best titles, man. Can't even compete with that. So this is going to be prime offering. Definitely check that out. It's going to be a little more in depth than our training groups. And then, this guy. No, I know him. So this is the best photo of me. Don't actually look like that. So I'm going to be running my marketing workshop. So although FCGPS is now focused on helping you run groups, I'm going to help you fill groups, right? So we want to help you. I want to help you learn how to market, how to develop a personal brand, how to market through social media, and how to get those groups filled so you can go out there and give your gift to the world. Here's the big one. We're getting a new website. Some of you guys have seen our website, but it's god-awful. We're getting a new one. It is coming with a lot of the money from this conference, and there's a couple big things that you're going to be in it. And I want to announce right now that all you guys are paying COGPS members. Check that out. The reason there was a ticket price increase is that we are not collecting dues, and all of you that have been here have a membership for a year. So as being a member, you're going to get special things on our website. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be building a group directory, so you can list your groups, so clients and other clinicians that want to find groups can find them easily online, right? Number one problem that we have with groups is that it's hard to fill them, and we're trying to address that need as FCGPS. We're also going to have membership profiles, so you guys get another psychology profile if you want one. We're going to have digital resources. We're going to have open source articles as well as recordings of our workshops that will be available for you to watch and to consume on your free time. Because you're all super duper busy. We're also going to have online voting for our election. So starting next year, we're going to be having contested elections. Angelo Filiberti, somewhere, is our nomination chair. And there he is. And we're talking about elections. And we're going to be having elections for all of our board positions. And each of them are contested. So if anyone is inspired by what you're seeing in this presentation, or by this conference itself, or what you're seeing online, come talk to me or Angelo, and talk about running for a board position. We want to get you involved, right? We're really trying to diversify our leadership and diversify our membership. So for anyone who wants to learn more about that, Angelo's your guy to go to. And we'll be having elections at the beginning of next year. A little bit more on the digital resources. RP will be doing that and organizing our resources. You got that little mock up there. And we just want to make this available because it's hard to find good literature on group. And we want that to be available to all of you. We're also going to be curating it based on some of our local leaders. So people's top 5 articles or top 10 articles on countertransference. We'll be curating that stuff for you so that you can consume it easily and learn more about group, even on your free time or at night or 1 o'clock if you don't sleep like I do. And then lastly, Jigen, who's up there. Woo! Give her a hand. We're going to make a documentary, right? So we are going to be interviewing all of the Colorado CGPs in order to commemorate the Colorado group culture. What we're building here is not just a training organization, it's really a community, and I'm happy that you guys are becoming a part of it. We're kind of like a family. And we want to commemorate that and interview people and kind of share the wisdom of all the years of practice. So Jigen's helping us to put together a documentary to reflect the history of our state and to help new group leaders learn what it's like to start. Because it's really hard as a new clinician, especially as a new group leader, to find your legs. And we want to be here for you. So that's that. Next year, our conference is going to be on cohesion and unity. So we're going to start selling tickets in the next week or so. So if you're excited by this, you want to get super duper 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 early bird at like some kind of discounted price, we got you. We're going to be uniting 4 states. That's our next trip. So that's about all I got. I want to give a thank you to everyone who's been here, to all of our presenters, to our keynote, Dr. Lucy Holmes, and our institute supervisor, Gil Spielberg. I also want to thank all of our sponsors, Queer Asterix, Harmony Foundation, Sandstone Care, Cedar, where we're here, this lovely building, Colorado Center for Clinical Excellence, and SETI, Somatic Experiencing Training Institute. They've all believed in us, and they're a big part of making this happen. Last thing I want to do is I have a couple announcements from Cedar, which is, just so you guys remember, this is a working outpatient and rehab facility. So if you haven't signed the Cedar's disclosure form, please do that at registration or to protect the confidentiality of the patients. Also, there are a couple groups that are happening right now. They'll be kind of moving in and out. So if you see patients, we're instructed not to disturb them and to let us know that the groups have changed. So they're going to be in the spiritual center and in the fitness center. We're going to be taking care of that as board members, but if you see someone you don't recognize, just let them go about their own business. They're already on their own program. Okay, so without further ado, I want to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Lucy Holmes.
It's such a pleasure to be here and see so many friends and to hear about all the exciting things that you're doing as an organization. Now, let me see it. So I'm going to be talking about 40 minutes or so. Will there be time for questions after?
It should just be done at 5 p.m.
Okay. When Freud was developing the artful science that he called psychoanalysis, he came up with a theory about why people suffer from mental illness. Freud had the idea that repression was the culprit. That if a person had a traumatic experience or a primitive and unacceptable impulse or desire that was too painful to confront, the mind would push it down into the unconscious and replace the memory or the thought or the feeling with a symptom, such as paralysis of a limb or hysterical blindness. Freud speculated that if he could help a patient remember what was being repressed, he or she would be cured of the unpleasant symptoms. He invented the technique of free association, what modern psychoanalysts call saying everything, to trick the mind into revealing the unconscious. More often than not, Freud could tell before the patient did what the unconscious idea was, and he used the technique of interpretation to reveal the unacceptable desire or impulse to the patient. He told his patient Dora about her unconscious homosexual and incestuous impulses, after which he was surprised, though perhaps the reader was not, that Dora terminated the treatment. In the case of the rat man, Freud explained to his patient that his obsessive fear of rats was actually an identification with them, and expressed a wish to have anal intercourse with his father. The rat man broke off treatment before these matters could be resolved. Though Freud's interpretations dealt with the most sensational ideas, his approach was essentially didactic. That is to say, he was teaching and guiding his patients. The process was in its essence hierarchical. Freud knew more than his hapless patient, and he was appealing to an overly emotional and irrational person from the high mountain of intellect and sanity. Freud had little success with this technique, though his theory of the unconscious and the workings of the mind are still extraordinarily useful. He was notoriously unsuccessful at curing anyone. Freud was highly suspicious of feelings, desires, impulses, wishes of any kind, particularly in the analyst. He recognized that there is such a thing as countertransference, but he advised his colleagues to be on guard against it and to root it out should it rear its ugly head in the treatment room. The therapist owed it to his patient to be neutral, unmoved, and unfeeling at all times. Later analysts began to question this rigid approach. In 1946, Franz Alexander introduced the concept of the corrective emotional experience. This is the idea that the patient is cured not by hearing new ideas, but by experiencing new feelings. In 1949, Donald Winnicott wrote about the value of hate in the countertransference. He insisted that sometimes hating a patient is just what the doctor ordered. And speaking of hate, modern analyst Hyman Spotnitz, writing in the 1960s, gave us the idea that it is aggression turned against the self that makes people crazy. And he said the goal in individual and group analysis should be to redirect that aggression and get the patient to tell us how angry he is at us and all the other people in the room. Spotnitz and his colleague Phyllis Meadow emphasized the role of emotional communication in the analytic situation, especially in the analyst's interventions. In their model, brilliant interpretations are not therapeutic, especially if they are correct. They are usually experienced by the patient as an attack. What is called for instead is the constant encouragement of the patient to put all of his thoughts and feelings into words. When I read articles and books by these analysts during my training, I knew instinctively that they were right. I knew that in my own analysis and my own group therapy experience, the moments that had been life-changing for me were the times when I was experiencing overwhelming angry or painful or frightening feelings. And my analyst, or a member of my group, said things to me that were full of emotion and totally new. When these intensely feelingful exchanges occurred, I could almost feel my brain being rewired. And indeed it was. Modern neuroscientists are able to watch the brain in action. They tell us that the human brain is actually 3 discrete brains that evolved at different times. The most primitive part of the brain, essentially no different than the brain of a dinosaur, is what Freud called the id. The mammalian brain, which is wrapped around the dinosaur brain, is where feelings originate. Neuroscientists can observe powerful electric charges, what Freud called the drives, or the instincts, pulsing up from the lower brains to the cerebral cortex, the most evolved but also the smallest part of the brain, where logic and ethics and rationality reside. But sadly, the cerebral cortex isn't able to send any electrical impulses down to the parts of the brain where instincts and feelings are produced. This is why people so often act like animals. It's also why Freud's brilliant interpretations had almost no effect on his patient's suffering. He was speaking to the cerebral cortex, which has no power to control the more primitive part of the brain. But when we work with feelings instead of ideas, we touch a deeper level of the brain. We're talking not only to the evolved cerebral cortex, but also to the more primitive mammalian brain. And that creates the possibility of changing the mind at a much more profound level. When we ask our patients to say everything in therapy, we are inviting them to discharge their primitive impulses, all those reptilian and mammalian charges, into words rather than action. And this exercise, which gradually becomes a habit of mind in therapy, effectively enhances the power of the cerebral cortex. When we think about our impulses and talk about them, we don't go into action. We can say that we'd like to kill our children without actually going to jail. We can admit we would like to eat everything on the buffet table without having to invest in queen-size pants. We can savor the feeling of wanting to have sex with someone who is totally inappropriate without being fired. If all goes well in group and individual therapy, we can come to really enjoy all our murderous and sexual feelings. We realize that they lend our lives color and vitality, and they help us know what's going on at an unconscious level. We don't have to be controlled by them or repress them to create symptoms. We can use them as data, not as imperatives to act, but rather useful information about what is going on inside us and the other people in our lives. It's so much easier to work as Freud did, telling our patients what's wrong with them and what they have to do to change. It feels so good, doesn't it, to know what to do? We don't have to feel much, just a sense of grandiose control, really. How much harder to sit with our patients, not trying to direct them or teach them, but just to understand them, to open ourselves to all the florid feelings they're inducing in us. It's a scary and overstimulating stance, and we need courage and lots of supervision to allow ourselves that attitude. Nowhere is this need to be more comfortable with primitive feelings in us and in our patients. It's in a group. A new member in one of my groups described her experience in the group as like being inside a popcorn popper, feeling her own feelings and others, exploding all around her. She was very overstimulated, and I knew exactly what she meant. Though I've been leading groups since the 1990s, I can still feel bombarded and overwhelmed by all the impulses, fears, and desires of my students and patients, and especially by the impulses, fears, and desires pummeling me from my own primitive brain when I am in a room with 20 articulate, feelingful people, most of whom have no problem talking about their aggression toward me for my inadequacies and my failings. It can be a scary experience. But I'm here to tell you that the deep characterological change, both in analyst and patient, that can occur in this highly emotional process is worth the challenge. Irvin Yalom and Lou Ormond, who both wrote extensively about group therapy, advocated the use of immediacy in groups. Rather than reciting sad monologues about our bad mothers, absent fathers, and acting out spouses, group members begin to get better when they focus on the here and now of the group room, when they put all their feelings and impulses toward the other people in the room into words during the session. When that happens, group members don't just report bad relationships, they demonstrate them right there with us in the room. And with the help of the other people watching, the group becomes a sort of laboratory where people can experiment, where new, more therapeutic relationships can begin to evolve. The best and most effective groups are the ones where members are engaging in what Lou Ormond called progressive emotional communication. Group members are encouraged to acknowledge and talk about their thoughts and feelings, not historical feelings toward their parents or their spouses, but immediate feelings toward the leader and the other people in the room. These emotional interchanges become progressive when they reveal new features of the characters of the people talking. And hopefully, this lively exchange of feelings, back and forth, moves both people talking and also the other people in the room to a new place. This is when emotional communication becomes progressive. Feelings expressed by one member lead to new feelings in another. And little by little, we begin to discover things we didn't know about other people. And even more importantly, things we didn't know about ourselves. We begin to learn how talking about our feelings instead of acting them out or defending against them in destructive ways can free us to make new, more satisfying relationships. Immediacy and progressive emotional communication are two of the most important dynamics in helping our clients and patients mature, grow, and achieve their goals. But encouraging this lively interchange can be very overstimulating to the therapist, and I want to talk about two techniques that can help with that. The first is establishing a group contract. When we begin with a group, it's helpful to set ground rules, which act as containers and boundaries in the creative chaos of a modern group. The first rule is that everything that happens in group stays in group. We establish a wall of confidentiality around the process, and we discourage members from having outside contact. This rule permits a safe environment for members to hopefully say everything and be totally honest about their most difficult feelings. When group members get together outside the treatment room and discuss group process, it creates unhelpful subgroups and competition. And worse, it dilutes and obstructs the group process. People say things on the telephone or across the dinner table that should be said in the treatment room, thereby avoiding, rather than working through, challenging dynamics. Another rule we establish has to do with action. Modern group is a talking cure, so we encourage members to put every thought and feeling into words without acting on it. A ban on action means no getting up out of your chair, no touching, hugging, kissing, strangling, or leaving the room. It also means no eating or drinking or smoking, since these actions are wonderful defenses against feelings. Saying that you feel thirsty or that you'd like to kill the person next to you is fine. It's recommended even. But there is a ban on turning strong feelings into actions. Putting everything into words without acting out gives group members a new sense of control over their dangerous wishes and impulses. The most important rule of the contract is that the job in group is to put all of your thoughts and feelings toward the other members of the group into words. This sounds simple, but it is amazingly challenging. And one of the most important tasks in modern group is to observe and talk about how people break this rule. People usually like to talk about themselves. Or if they are encouraged to focus on the other, they like to engage in attack, describing the inadequacies of other members. The modern group therapist must constantly focus on helping group members to have feelings toward, not judgments about, the other people in the room. It is important to remember that the group contract provides a set of rules which are made to be broken. Rules create resistance, and resistance is the meat and potatoes of modern analytic group. When group members resist the rules, they are communicating things that they're not yet able to put into words. Their resistances present the difficulties that impede their growth, and our job becomes helping a defiant group member put the aggression that the resistance masks into words. I love rules. My personal history left me with a deep-seated fear of anarchy, and rules are comforting to me. But the spelling out of the contract makes many people angry. They feel controlled, and they hate the leader for being such a rigid dictator. And this is fine. This is even desired. When we lay down the rules and help people verbalize how annoying rules are, we are off and running. It's hard to sit in a room with 20 people who are mad at you. But it helps to remember Spotnitz's idea that if you're helping your patients talk about their anger toward you, you are helping them move the aggression off the tendency to confuse their own minds and into the object world. As group members get better and better at discharging their aggression creatively and without assault into the room, it frees each mind to grow and mature. We can say new things which astonish even ourselves, and this is when exciting things begin to happen. The rules contain our primitive wishes, fears, and impulses, while still encouraging their expression and analysis. Another important aid we have if we aspire to gain comfort and skill with primitive feelings in our patients and in ourselves is supervision. I'm here to tell you that if you want to run groups that are full of emotion, and I hope you do, you should be in supervision for life. I know that many mental health professionals think of supervision as something that ends when you get the diploma. But unless you're okay with dying young, you had better have a place where you can discharge all the toxic feelings, yours and your patients, that this kind of work induces. I'm on the faculty of an institute called the Center for Modern Psychoanalytic Studies in New York, and we have a reputation for having a faculty that is very long of tooth. It's not unusual for analysts in our community to live well into their 90s, and several have lived to be 103. I'm convinced this is because we are all addicted to talking. We stay in analysis till our analysts forget who we are, and supervision is as important to all of us as physical exercise and good dental hygiene. We go to supervision to put all the desires, wishes, fears, and impulses that our patients induce in us into words. We discharge all these strong feelings into language so they don't get stuck in our bodies, making us sick, or in our minds, leaving us with a heavy feeling of existential despair and fatigue. Now I want to present two cases from my own experience running groups. I picked these two because they were instances of intense and primitive feeling, not only in the group member, but also in the group leader. One has to do with sex, and the other aggression. I'm going to start with aggression and leave the sex for dessert. About 10 years ago, I decided to start my first supervision group. I had been encouraged to do this by a colleague of mine. I'll call her Christine. Christine and I had been in a supervision group with Lou Ormond together, and she had always had a very positive transference to me, telling me she liked the way I carried myself and admiring my way of being with patients. These positive feelings were mutual. I found Christine to be articulate and clear-thinking about her work, and incredibly wise and forgiving about human nature. When Lou died, Christine told me she wanted to be in a supervision group with me, and that she would help me form that group. I was astonished by this unambivalent support for several reasons. The first was that Christine was older than me by about 10 years and infinitely more experienced. So how on earth did she think she could learn from me? The second reason was that Christine is an African-American woman, and I am a blonde, white woman with a Southern accent. How did she approach her relationship with me with such apparent indifference to the sad and sordid story of Black history in this country, particularly in the South? With Christine's help, I formed a group of 6 therapists. The group worked well together, discussing cases and helping each other with difficult feelings from their own histories that interfered with their work. Christine was the only person of color in the group, but the topic of race never came up. That is, until Christine asked if she could invite her best friend, also a therapist, to join the group. After some discussion, it was decided that I would meet Christine's friend, I'll call her Lila, and interview her about joining the group. Christine assured the group that she had praised us to the skies, and Lila was very excited about the possibility of joining the group. When I opened the door to Lila at the appointed time for her consultation, I was not surprised to see that she was a black woman. But Lila looked like she had been hit in the face with a bucket of ice water when she saw me. And then I realized that Christine had not mentioned to her that I was white. Lila sat down for the session and anxiously filled out my intake form. But her anxiety quickly turned to annoyance and judgment. The fee was too high. The number of members was too low. She demanded to know my credentials. And when I asked her what kind of credentials she needed, she became really angry. My office was too small, too ostentatious for her to possibly feel comfortable. By the end of the consultation, I was sure that I had seen the last of Lila. But to my surprise, she called to tell me she was going to give the group a try. Lila was unhappy from day one. There were too many men in the group, and not enough women. Everyone was too young to be of any possible use to her. She snorted with contempt at members' attempts to engage her. The only person she had any interest in was Christine. When Christine defended the group and the members, Lila laughed and shook her head, smiling at Christine like they were sharing a private joke in a room full of imbeciles. Despite all these resistances, Lila wanted to talk about a brother of hers who was dying. This brother was making demands on her that Lila felt he had no right to impose. The group was very supportive in helping Lila set a boundary with her brother. Though she began to warm to the other group members, she was unwavering in her dislike of me. Every time I made a comment to her or to the other members of the group, she would roll her eyes and talk to Christine. One of Lila's main complaints was that this group was too small. She attributed this to my lack of professional success. I wasn't skilled enough to be able to attract or manage a large group. The group was very clear that they wanted new members. I told the group I was looking for more people, and after a few months, I found a woman closer in age to Lila and Christine than the rest of the group, and an experienced therapist. But I made a big mistake. I used Lou Ormont's model for adding new members. Lou would just put a new member in. He did absolutely no preparation of the group for a new member. So I did the same thing. When Lila arrived and saw the new face, she turned her chair so that her back was toward the new member, and she asked me what the hell did I think I was doing. You don't just add a new member without discussing it with the group. That's abusive. Other members rushed in to welcome our new member, and they reminded Lila that our new member was a woman, which she had requested. Lila was having none of it. The new member, thank God, was a person with a very strong ego, and she tried to talk to Lila. She said, "I can see you're angry at Lucy, Lila, and I understand that, but I hope that doesn't prevent us from having a relationship." Lila folded her arms in response and stared at me stonily. Christine said to Lila, "Lila, how about turning your chair to face the circle?" Lila snorted and sat in icy silence. The other members became almost manic in their attempts to be friendly to our new baby, asking her questions about herself. But when she told the group she was an analyst, Lila said, "I don't want any analysts in this group. Lucy's an analyst and one is enough. Psychoanalysis is a rich white man's profession." Our new member lasted for 3 sessions, but after the third, she gave me a call. Chuckling philosophically, she said, "My heart goes out to you, Lucy. You've got quite a challenge in that group, but I don't want to spend all my time dealing with Lila's rage." I told her I understood and I wished her well. When the group reconvened, I told them that our new member would not be returning. I thought Lila would be pleased, but instead, she was angry. She told me I had really screwed things up. It was all my fault that the new member had left. The next time I attempted to add a new member, I gave the group a 3-week warning. And I let them know that the person that was coming in was a man with plenty of experience. I asked Christine how long she thought it would take Lila to kill the new baby. Christine laughed and said, she turned to Lila and said, "I hope you'll try to behave this time, Lila." Lila said, "As long as he's not a rich Jew." Christine said, "Lila, that's offensive. You're always implying that Lucy is a racist, but that remark is anti-Semitic." This seemed to silence Lila temporarily, and when our new member arrived, Lila was quiet. But the other members welcomed him and asked him about his professional experience. At one point, when he was telling the group about himself, he remarked, "I know this is a supervision group, but I assume, like all supervision groups, we sometimes talk about our personal histories." Lila came to life at this. She said with narrowed eyes, "Absolutely not. We're not here to talk about your personal problems. If you need more therapy, this group is not for you." Christine jumped in. "Lila, what do you mean we spent weeks talking about your brother?" She turned to our new member and said, "Of course you can talk about your personal issues. We all have personal issues that can affect our work." Lila barked, "This is a supervision group. If you want a therapy group, you need to go elsewhere. I'm not wasting my time listening to someone who is too crazy to be a therapist." The group heartily defended its new member, and he, for his part, seemed to enjoy Lila's provocations. So he stayed. A few months later, though, he got into real hot water. Lila was presenting a very difficult case, a man who had a terrible temper and routinely abused his wife and children. Our new male member asked Lila what her patient's ethnicity was. Lila got the familiar, narrow-eyed, icy expression on her face and said, "What difference does that make?" "I just wondered if he was black." "And why would that matter?" Lila said through tight lips. "Well, black men have a lot to be angry about in this racist society. I just wondered if he was black," our new member explained. It's hard to describe the storm that followed. Lila stood and said, "I cannot stay in this meeting of the Ku Klux Klan one moment longer." I urged her to sit down, and she did. But the diatribe that followed was murderous and relentless. For 3 weeks after this unfortunate question from our new member, Lila monologued about race. She told me I was a Southern racist who is incapable of understanding. I joined her, saying it was quite true that I come from a racist culture, but that I was very eager for her to help me understand what her experience had been like. She told me there was no way that I could possibly understand. Christine tried to talk to Lila, but Lila was furious that Christine didn't share her outrage at my racist group. She accused Christine of being an Oreo, slang for a person with a black skin who thinks like a white person inside. Christine shook her head sadly and said, "I understand what it's like to be black in this society, but I don't have energy for this, Lila. I just don't go there. I've accomplished a lot in my life through hard work, and I know a lot of good people, white and black. I just don't have time to stew in my own juices about race." Now Lila's monologue turned into a bitter argument between the two old friends. You may be wondering, where was I in this little drama? Why had I not intervened more with Lila, with the new members, and during the arguments between Lila and Christine? The answer is that I was paralyzed by my own subjective countertransference. Lila had my number. I was raised in a racist society. I was stuck in my own soul-scorching guilt about my ancestors who had owned slaves, and my own parents whose racist language around the dinner table was a given. One of the reasons I had fled Texas was the racism that even as a small child was terrifying and abhorrent to me. But I knew I had carried some of my history with me when I came north. I knew that when a young boy passed me on Broadway late at night, I had different feelings if he was black than if he was white. I couldn't take an active role in the group because there was a part of me that thought Lila was right about me. It took many hours in my own supervision to realize there was more to my feelings toward Lila than guilt. But slowly, as my colleagues verbalized their anger at Lila, I began to realize I was angry too at this rigid, judgmental woman. One day, Lila was attacking me for my racism and my incompetence, and Christine screamed, "I've had enough!" Lila seemed astonished by this outburst, and she said, What? Christine said, "I said I've had enough. I'm sorry about how hard it is for you in a racist society, Lila, but it's time for you to get your foot off Lucy's throat." In that moment, I felt with a rush all the primitive rage I had been repressing for months. I realized with horror that I had a visual image of my hands around Lila's throat. I had a deep, almost irresistible impulse to spring out of my chair and murder her. My face turned bright red and I could hardly breathe, but I thought, okay, Lucy, okay, this is just a feeling. Is there any way I can use this therapeutically? Lila was saying, "I can't stay in this group one moment longer. All of you honkies have managed to turn my best friend against me." Suddenly, I knew what to do. "You're right, Lila," I said quietly. "It's not in your best interest to stay. You've worked very hard and very valiantly here, but this environment is toxic for you, and I've failed to make it better. I agree with you. It's time for you to move on." So Lila left, and the group went on without her. I've added several new members since Lila's departure, and Christine is still a valued presence. But I present this sad story to make the point that it wasn't until I was able to experience my primitive rage and my murderous impulses that I was able to prevent Lila from destroying my group and hopefully to move on to a group that would be better for her. So that's enough of primitive aggression. Let's move on to sex. I have a theory that intense sexual feelings between therapist and patient are even more troubling than intense rage. I know I never do my best work when I love a patient too much. It clouds my ability to see them clearly, usually because I idealize them and miss the aggression entirely. But boy, did I fall in love with Greg. Greg had attended a conference where I had spoken, and a few days afterward, he called me to set up an appointment. When he came to my office, he said, "I knew from the minute you opened your mouth that I had to be in group with you. You were so wise and so caring and so honest about your feelings. I just knew I needed to work with you and learn from you." Greg is exactly my son's age, and he looks like my son, who is gorgeous. At least I think so. Like most mothers, I did a lot of mourning when my son left me to make his own life, and here he was, back in my office, and telling me how wonderful I was. I was in love. I put Greg into a group where he continued to compliment me on everything. I was so warm and caring, sensitive and protective when members were hurting and suffering, direct and honest when they were fooling themselves. My clothes were elegant. Unlike his mother, I always knew what he was thinking and was always interested in his thoughts. In his courtship of me, Greg pretty much ignored the other men in the room, and as far as the women went, he was paternal and sympathetic with just a hint of condescension. In my blind infatuation, I was surprised to see that Greg made everybody else in the group mad. The women would say things like, "I don't trust this seductive stance toward Lucy, Greg. You must have other feelings." The men would complain that Greg was subtly controlling the group as my #1 fan. "You're such an ass kisser, Greg." Is seducing really the only way you can get Lucy's attention? Yeah, the women would chime in. There are other women in this room too. What am I, chopped liver? My love affair with Greg went on for several months, and though I realized we were both in a resistance pattern, I was too consumed with my countertransference feelings to do much about it. Knowing that I was in trouble, I took the situation with Greg to my own supervision group. Interestingly enough, all my peers felt angry at him. I thought, just like the group. All these smart people, are they experiencing something I'm repressing? I had a dream about Greg after I presented him in my supervision group. We were in group, and my husband was there. Greg was telling me that he had told my husband that I had to leave him and marry Greg. Don't worry, Greg said, your husband understands, and he agrees that we belong together. I looked at my husband and saw that what Greg said was true. My husband seemed perfectly happy to let me go. I suddenly felt very scared. Greg was painting my face with thick, colorful paint, and one of the women in the group asked him why. He said, because Lucy is so beautiful. Ha, said the female group member. She may be beautiful with all that makeup, but why don't you see what's behind it? At this point, Greg looked scared, and he started frantically washing my face with a wet towel. When he removed all the paint, he gasped in astonishment and said to me, I thought you were beautiful, but you're old and ugly. No, I said, I look better without the paint. Shortly after this dream, Greg began to send me emails which were 2 or 3 pages long, telling me about his neglectful, cold parents and his relationships with women. He had had many, and they were all short and unsatisfying. I responded to these emails by telling him to bring up these issues in group, but the emails kept coming. And finally, I just stopped responding. One day, Greg came into the group, and uncharacteristically, he sat in stony silence. After an hour went by, I turned to one of the other men in the group and said, Ralph, why do you think Greg is so quiet? Ralph looked at Greg and shrugged. I don't know. He looks angry to me. I turned to Greg and asked, does Ralph understand you? Greg didn't acknowledge that I had spoken. Instead, he turned to Karen and said, I guess I've been quiet because I've just been watching Karen. Karen, you look so beautiful today. I get so excited when I look at you. I don't know if it's because you're so pretty or if it's just the fact that everything that comes out of your mouth is so smart. Karen blushed and said, wow, I didn't see that coming. I thought you only had eyes for Lucy. Greg looked at me sadly and said, I did love Lucy, but I've come to realize she can be pretty disappointing. I asked him how I had disappointed him. He didn't answer, but reported to the group that he had written me long, heartfelt emails about things he wanted me to know, and I hadn't even bothered to answer him. I guess I just turned women into my uninterested mother, but I have to say, Lucy, I really thought you were different. After this, Greg hardly spoke to me at all. He turned all his focus to Karen. I had been fairly blind to his seduction of me, but his seduction of Karen made me mad. I could see the aggression in it. After a few months, his love affair with Karen ended as abruptly as the one with me, when Karen did something that disappointed Greg. As he had done with me, Greg didn't confront Karen in anger. Instead, he fell in love with Donna, another member of the group. For the next few months, we listened to how wonderful Donna was, until she made a mistake. At this point, the group confronted Greg. Jeff, another member of the group, nicknamed Greg the Bumblebee. You go from flower to flower, Greg, till you suck them dry and move on. In response, Greg said, it's fascinating to me that I have created my world in this group. I fall in love with a woman, idealize her, and then she disappoints me, and inevitably they always disappoint me. So I end the relationship, usually by falling in love with someone else. It took many months for Greg to realize that he was mad at me, and all the other women in the group, and that he acted out this aggression not only by dropping us, but also by masking his anger with manipulative seduction. It took even longer for him to begin to verbalize his anger when he was mad at a disappointing woman. But as that began to happen, Greg was able to create new, more satisfying relationships with the women in the group, and finally, in his life. So I hope these cases illustrate that desire, wishes, fears, and impulses can be harnessed to have a therapeutic effect on groups and the individuals in those groups. Thank you.